The coffee was still steaming in the small kitchen when Lori Ann Halverson left the winter formal in the town of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in 1971. Outside, heavy snow was falling, cold wind blowing through the empty roads along Lake Menomonee, where the headlights of the 19-year-old girl were the only light left in the night. Neighbors remember seeing her Chevrolet Nova turn onto the road leading to the lake, but no one ever saw her return. The next morning, the snow had erased all traces, leaving a shaken town and a family shattered in silence. And what lay hidden deep beneath the frozen lake surface for the next 50 years, when brought to light, would make all of Wisconsin shudder. Before we dive deep into this 50-year-long lie story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next cold cases. On Friday evening, December 1971, snow blanketed the roads around the town of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. The crisp Midwestern air mingled with the scent of damp wood and the misty breath of the approaching Christmas season. On a small hill north of town, the lights of Regis High School cast pale golden beams, reflecting off the snow. Inside, the winter dance was underway. Music, laughter, and the joy of a town that seemed like nothing ever happened there. Amid the crowd, 19-year-old Lori Ann Halverson wore a cream-colored wool dress and a striking red wool coat. She was the last to leave the hall after saying goodbye to a few friends, and mentioning she'd be home early because she had to work extra shifts at the bookstore the next day. Everyone knew Lori as the energetic straight-A student who was polite and rarely stayed out late. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Halverson, lived in a small house near Menomonee Lake, less than 10 minutes' drive from the school. Every time Lori went to a party, Mrs. Margaret would habitually check the clock and count the minutes, only relaxing when she heard the sound of her daughter's car pulling up to the door. That night, the clock in the house struck 11, then midnight. There was no sound except the wind whistling through the trees and the snow falling on the eaves. The phone remained silent. Mr. Halverson stepped out onto the porch, turned on the yard light, hoping to see the headlights of the familiar red Chevrolet Nova. The road leading home was empty, just smooth drifts of untouched snow. At 1 a.m., they began calling Lori's friends. Everyone said she had left the dance early, alone, still smiling and waving as she headed out of the parking lot. One person vaguely remembered seeing her stop at a gas station near the Grand Avenue intersection, but no one was sure. The only sign was her brief promise before leaving the school. "I'll call Mom when I get home." When the clock hands passed 2 a.m., the worry in the small house turned to fear. Mr. Halverson threw on a coat and drove along the lakeside roads, shining a flashlight into dark turnoffs. Mrs. Margaret stood by the door, clutching the phone, staring out through the fogged window. Nothing but darkness and endless white snow. At 2:15, she turned back inside, trembling as she picked up the receiver and dialed the Dunn County Sheriff's Office. A sleepy voice answered on the other end. She spoke quickly, trying to stay calm. Her daughter Lori Ann Halverson had left the dance around 11 and hadn't come home. She feared something terrible had happened. The police asked for a description and noted the last time she was seen. When she hung up, she sat dazed at the table, still gripping the phone tightly. Outside, the wind howled louder, snowflakes swirling in the streetlight glow. The living room wall clock ticked steadily, each second stretching endlessly. Somewhere in the night of Eau Claire, a red car might be stranded in the ice, or it might have gone farther than the roads they knew. In that small house, the fear and waiting began, and it would not end for decades to come. The next morning, Saturday, the pale winter sun filtered through the bare trees, reflecting off the thick snow covering all of Eau Claire. When Mr. and Mrs. Halverson stepped outside, a Dunn County Sheriff's vehicle was already parked in the yard, its blue lights flashing silently in the frost. 2 deputies took down the information, promising to scour all the routes Lori usually took. The previous night's snow made finding tracks nearly hopeless. Every road was blanketed, every tire mark gone. But they started anyway, knowing that in the first hours, every minute counted. A small search party was organized that very morning. Neighbors, classmates, and even strangers came to help. Some brought flashlights, others used snowmobiles to probe the roads leading to the outskirts. They split into groups, fanning out in 3 directions, one toward Menomonee Lake, another along Highway 29, and the last to the woods south of town. Everyone hoped the girl had just skidded off the road, gotten stuck somewhere. No one dared think of anything worse. Near Menomonee Lake, the search team led by Lieutenant Richard Lowell paused when they spotted an unusual depression in the snowbank, stretching right to the frozen water's edge. Lowell knelt down, shone his light, then gently tapped the thin ice. "Could be tire tracks," he said, but no one dared confirm it. They marked the spot and continued around the lake. The biting cold turned breaths to white vapor, the wind so strong that those standing close had to shout to hear each other. That noon, the first radio bulletin about the disappearance aired on the local station. Dunn County Sheriff's Office is searching for 19-year-old Lori Ann Halverson, missing after leaving the winter dance at Ridges High School last night. The name Lori echoed over the airwaves, catching the whole town's attention. At the coffee shop, people gossiped and speculated. At church, the priest announced prayers for the young girl. Some recalled seeing a red car along Grand Avenue, but couldn't confirm if it was Lori's. As the sun set, the search teams had found nothing. They returned to the lake, lighting torches that blazed against the icy expanse. A woman's beige glove was discovered about 30 meters from the shore. It was damp, muddied with snow, but bore no distinctive marks. The police bagged it as evidence, sealing it carefully. Mr. Halverson stood silently watching, his eyes sunken from the sleepless night. Mrs. Margaret stayed home, sitting by the radio, listening to every update, hoping for something clearer, but there was only silence. The second night passed in exhaustion and dread. The search expanded to neighboring towns, checking remote rural roads. No traces, no new witnesses. Snow fell again, erasing any fragile signs left behind. The police noted it might be an unexplained disappearance, but the family protested. She wouldn't just vanish like that. On the third day, the local paper ran a big headline on the front page: "Young woman vanishes in Eau Claire winter, entire town joins search." A photo of Lori smiling brightly in her school uniform tugged at everyone's heart, but behind the missing posters going up everywhere, a different feeling simmered, the fear that perhaps the girl would never come back. As the search entered its fourth day, police shifted from hope to investigation. Lieutenant Richard Lowell called a small meeting at the Dunn County headquarters. On the table was a map of the area around Menomonee Lake, crisscrossed with red lines marking search spots. No doubt about it, Lori Ann Halverson was completely gone, and the chance she'd left town on her own was next to zero. In cases like this, police usually turned to those closest to the victim, and in Eau Claire, everyone knew about Evan Cole, Lori's boyfriend. Evan was 20, went to the same school as Lori, and worked part-time at an auto repair shop on the outskirts. They'd been dating for nearly 2 years, seen as the model young couple in this small town. Evan was the quiet type, gentle, a bit shy, but like any young relationship, they had their spats, especially as Lori started talking about leaving Wisconsin for college out of state. Police saw it as a plausible motive for a flare-up. That morning, Evan was asked to come to headquarters to assist with the investigation. He walked in pale-faced, hands still greasy with motor oil. In the interrogation room, Richard Lowell asked when he'd last seen Lori. Evan replied, his voice breaking, "That night, I just walked her to the parking lot, said good night. She said she'd call home when she got there. I never thought." He trailed off, eyes on the floor. The police took meticulous notes. They asked about arguments, if Lori had mentioned going anywhere after the dance. Evan shook his head, denying any conflicts. However, a few classmates mentioned that Lori and Evan had seemed distant lately. One friend whispered to a reporter, "I think they're drifting apart. Lori wants to get out, and he just wants to stay here." Rumors spread quickly through town. The next day, the Eau Claire Leader ran a vague headline, "Boyfriend last to see Lori." Police questioned but no conclusions. The wording said nothing explicit, but it was enough to make Evan Cole's name whispered in every coffee shop, church and school hallway. People looked at him with eyes mixed between pity and suspicion. Evan started avoiding going out, staying inside his parents' house on the south side of town. His mother said he wasn't eating or sleeping, sitting by the window every night, staring out at the road like he was waiting for something. Meanwhile, police continued searching his house, checking his car, taking paint and fiber samples to match against evidence. Everything came back negative. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no proof Lori had been there after the dance. But once the shadow of suspicion falls on someone, it doesn't fade easily. Lori's parents, though believing Evan was innocent, couldn't shake the thought that maybe he knew more than he'd said. Mrs. Margaret went to see him, sitting in the quiet living room, saying just one thing, "If you know anything, please tell us." Evan just bowed his head, hands clenched together, unable to speak. Lieutenant Lowell, after reviewing all the statements, concluded there wasn't enough to charge Evan, but he kept him on the watch list, because no one's completely clear until the truth is found. Still, deep down, Lowell felt something didn't fit, like this case was more complicated than a young couple's quarrel. For the town of Eau Claire, suspicion had begun to creep in. The missing flyers faded under the snow and rain, and quiet fear replaced hope. Someone whispered that maybe Lori had been picked up by someone else on the way home. A neighbor swore they'd heard tires screeching near the lake that night. But when police went back to check, the snow had covered everything. Every clue vanished, leaving only the unanswered question: where exactly had Lori gone, and who really knew the truth? The following week, no one in the town of Eau Claire could live normally anymore. The December cold that year seemed denser, seeping into every windowpane, every conversation at the dinner table. After the newspapers published the story about the suspected boyfriend, people began looking at each other with wary eyes. No one let their daughters come home from school late anymore. Mothers took turns standing to pick up their children at the school gate, and every house had its doors locked tight before nightfall. A town that had once been peaceful, where people were used to leaving their cars in the driveway and doors unbolted, now became a place where everyone feared the dark. At St. Olaf Church, the priest organized a prayer vigil for Lori. The ancient sanctuary, once warm, now echoed with sobs. Hundreds of candles lined up in rows, the smoke from incense drifting faintly in the flickering light. Mrs. Margaret Halverson sat in the front pew, her face haggard, clutching a framed wooden photo of her daughter tightly in her hands. People came to console her, but no one knew what to say. A young girl vanishing in the middle of a small town that unsettled people more than any robbery or accident ever could. As the community sank into fear, rumors began to flourish. Some said they saw a dark green pickup truck appear near the lake that night. Others insisted Lori had argued with someone before leaving school. The police had to field hundreds of calls, most of them vague and useless. Lieutenant Richard Lowell and his team sifted through every tip, but every lead dead-ended. A few witnesses exaggerated, some made up stories for attention. The reports piled up day by day, but nothing new emerged. The press didn't let up. They reconstructed the scene, published photos of Lori smiling in her school uniform, calling her the winter girl who vanished. Her image appeared on newsstands everywhere, then on local TV screens. The radio station replayed the priest's prayer, ending with the line, "If anyone has seen Lori Ann Halverson, please report it to the Dunn County Sheriff's Office immediately." But the more information that was released, the greater the panic grew. Evan Cole became the center of unwanted attention. Even though the police had stated he was not a prime suspect, most townsfolk still didn't believe it. He was followed by strangers, bad-mouthed at work, and then fired by his garage boss. One morning, his house window was smashed with a scrawled note reading, "Tell the truth." His family had to move temporarily to relatives' home in La Crosse. Suspicion had turned into a plague, spreading fast and leaving cracks that were hard to mend. The police continued searching around Lake Menomonee and nearby roads. The snow was so deep that digging became nearly impossible. Hunters, fishermen, even firefighters were mobilized, but all returned empty-handed. "It's like she dissolved into thin air," one officer said. The only item found in the woods, nearly 2 miles from the lake, was a silver maple leaf earring. Mr. Halverson recognized it as the pair Lori used to wear, but no one could be sure when it had fallen there. That fragile piece of evidence only heightened the fear. If the girl hadn't left on her own, then who had taken her in a town as familiar as this? Night after night, the Halverson house still kept the porch light on all through, like a beacon of waiting. Inside, the dinner table still had 3 places set, Lori's chair untouched by anyone. But day by day, that light increasingly resembled a lone candle flickering, lost in the vast white snowstorm. Christmas passed in silence, no music, no tree. In Eau Claire, people no longer counted down the days to the holiday, they only counted the days Lori hadn't been found. And somewhere in the cold wind, the unanswered question lingered like mist: what had really happened to that girl on that winter night? January 1972 passed with unrelenting snowfall. Lake Menomonee froze solid, becoming a hazy mirror, reflecting Wisconsin's overcast gray sky. The search team finally had to pull back, leaving wooden stakes marking the shoreline, and a few tire tracks sunk into the ice. The Dunn County Sheriff's Office held a brief press conference. No new evidence, no witnesses, no vehicle tracks. They suspended the search to await more favorable weather conditions. but everyone understood that meant Lori Ann Halverson's case had slipped into oblivion. The Halverson family clung to fragile hope. Every week, they still called the police to ask about progress, still reposting the wind-torn missing posters on telephone poles. A few volunteers continued trekking through the woods, staking flags at suspicious spots, but then the snow melted, rain came, and all traces were washed away. Days dragged on in weary waiting, and finally, life forced them to move forward. Mr. Halverson returned to work at the paper mill. Mrs. Margaret took a part-time teaching job at the nearby elementary school. But in the small kitchen, Lori's teacup remained on the shelf like an immovable part. In the town center, people stopped talking about Lori, turning instead to new stories: the rising gas prices, the upcoming snowstorm, the high school basketball season. Occasionally, someone would spot the photo of the brown-haired girl smiling brightly in an old newspaper and pause in silence for a moment, but then fold it away. The disappearance gradually became something people mentioned with regretful tones. It's sad that case was never solved. Lieutenant Richard Lowell, who had once led the search, still occasionally drove by the lake area. He would stop on the hillside, gazing out at the vast water now covered in a layer of white ice. In his heart, that case was like a scar that would never fully heal. Lowell filed the final report in February, closing the file with the line, "No further leads." Afterward, he transferred to another department, then gradually became known as a dedicated exemplary officer. Few remembered anymore that he was the one who had stood in that year's blizzard, calling the name of the girl who never answered. Spring arrived, the snow melted, but nothing was revealed. No car, no body, no answers. Everything was swallowed by time. The Lori Ann Halverson file was closed, tucked into the county archive's steel cabinet. The clerk affixed a small label to the cover: "Missing Person, December 17, 1971. The thin stack of papers, but inside, contained an entire winter no one could forget. The next year, the Halverson family sold the small house by the lake and moved south in the state to live with relatives. Mrs. Margaret said she couldn't bear passing the road Lori had once driven on every time. The house stood empty, its porch peeling paint, the porch light that once burned all night now just a faint shadow amid the snow. In Eau Claire, time kept flowing, and the name Lori Ann Halverson gradually became just an old notation in the police files. But for those who had searched for her that year, sometimes on winter nights, when the wind blew across the lake, they still said they could hear a distant echo, like a call buried under the thick ice. And in the memory of a small town, that story had never truly closed. It was only covered by silence and long years without answers. The 1970s closed, then came the 1980s, 1990s. Time passed as if sweeping away every last trace of that long-ago disappearance. Eau Claire gradually returned to the peaceful rhythm of a Midwestern town, winters still blanketed in white snow, summers still echoing with children's laughter by the lake. But for those who had lived through the winter of 1971, the name Lori Ann Halverson still lingered somewhere in memory, like a faint scar one never truly forgets. After moving, Mr. and Mrs. Halverson lived quietly in a small town near Madison. They never sold the old wooden chest containing Lori's things: a few books, a wool scarf, some photos taken in front of the school. Every year, Mrs. Margaret sent a postcard to the Dunn County Sheriff's Office, with only the brief note, "Please don't forget her." Sometimes, newly assigned officers would reply with a form letter, promising to review upon new information. But nothing ever changed. In Dunn County, Lori's file was gradually moved from the investigations room to storage. A thin cardboard box, numbered M1271, shelved next to hundreds of other missing persons cases. Younger officers knew little about it, only hearing it as an old local tale. Lieutenant Richard Lowell, the one who had led the search, continued to advance in rank, then retired in the early 1990s. He lived with his wife in Chippewa Falls, respected by all as an icon of local law enforcement, calm, upright, reliable. No one mentioned Lori when speaking of him anymore. Occasionally, in the 1980s, someone thought they spotted a girl resembling Lori in another state, Minnesota, or even Illinois. Police noted it, compared files, then crossed it off. No solid evidence. Some old articles were rewritten, but only in brief lines under unsolved files. When DNA technology began applying to criminal investigations in the late 1990s, Lori's file was proposed for review, but police deemed there were no reliable samples left. The car, clothes, everything had never been found. The proposal was shelved indefinitely. The town of Eau Claire changed a lot. The paper mill closed, a new mall sprang up, old roads were paved smooth. The younger generation grew up unaware that the spot where they ice skated in winter had once been a search hub for the missing girl. As for the older folks, they occasionally brought up the case at church meetings or veterans gatherings, their voices slow, laced with sorrow and fear. "That taught us not to assume everything stays safe forever," one said. Then they fell silent again. In 1999, young officer Tom Kessler joined the Dunn County Investigations Unit. During an inventory of old files, he stumbled upon box M1271. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, Evan Cole's interrogation transcripts, a few black and white photos of the icy lake shore. "The Winter Girl," Kessler jotted in his notebook, then put it back. He didn't know that decades later, he would be the one to reopen this case. In the 2000s, Wisconsin launched the Cold Case Initiative program, focusing on reviewing unsolved cases, but prioritizing homicides with biological evidence. Lori's disappearance wasn't on the list. Layers of new people came, generations of officers left, and the silence stretched like a curse. By 2010, both Mr. and Mrs. Halverson were in their later years. In Mrs. Margaret's final diary, there was a smudged handwritten line, "If anyone still remembers, please find my daughter." Those simple words remained on the page, like a prayer sent into the void. 40 years passed. Lake Menomonee still lay there, quiet, serene, as if it had never known any secrets buried beneath its cold waters. But somewhere, in the deep silt layers and thin ice, the truth still waited to be pulled to the surface. And one day, when the weather shifted, when the lake level dropped after a long drought, Eau Claire would have to face that memory it thought had gone dormant again. In the summer of 2021, Wisconsin endured a severe drought unseen in many years. The waters of Lake Menomonee receded day by day, exposing cracked mudflats and the pungent smell of algae and rot. Locals in the area complained of dead fish floating belly up, fishing boats stranded aground, but no one imagined that this very desiccation would drag a half-century buried secret to the surface. On a mid-July morning, a local fisherman named Ben Murray was checking his nets near the eastern shore when he spotted something peeking out from under the mud, a dark metallic mass, protruding just enough to catch the sunlight. At first he thought it was an old oil drum, but as he drew closer, he recognized an odd curve, the fender of a car. Ben marked the spot and called the Dunn County Sheriff's Office. A recovery team arrived that very afternoon. As the small crane was lowered, the mud churned up like smoke, releasing a thick, musty odor of long-buried dampness. Under the watchful eyes of a few curious onlookers, the object slowly emerged, the faded red paint beneath the muck, the dented and peeling front end. When the license plate became visible, a nearby firefighter let out a soft gasp. "That's a 71 plate." A hush fell over the group. In that instant they all understood what they were looking at. Police cordoned off the area immediately. State forensic experts were summoned. They set up white tents, strung up tape, and photographed every angle. After several hours, the 1969 red Chevrolet Nova was fully hauled from the mud. The silt was over half a meter thick, but the frame remained intact. In the front seat, they found a woman's beige wool coat, rotted through, and a few small items, a key, a tarnished silver ring, an old pair of leather shoes. There were no signs of remains. A young officer whispered, "She might still be in the lake, just drifted elsewhere." The lieutenant in charge replied curtly, "Keep quiet with the media until we verify." The news leaked within hours. That afternoon, WQW Eau Claire aired a breaking report. The car of the 1971 missing girl has been found at the bottom of Lake Menomonee. The name Lori Ann Halverson echoed once more. For the first time in half a century, residents flocked to the lake, standing behind the police barriers, staring intently at the rusted hunk of metal draped in white sheeting. Some who had been Lori's students, now grandparents, broke down in tears. "I thought I'd never hear that girl's name again in my lifetime," one woman told a reporter. When the car was transported to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab in Madison, technicians began the meticulous work, vacuuming out the mud, drying each seat fragment, sampling fabric fibers and bone fragments, if any. They found traces of human tissue on the driver's seatbelt, tiny, but enough for DNA testing. The sample was sealed per modern protocols, something impossible in 1971. Results would take weeks, but the car's discovery alone was enough for Dunn County authorities to officially reopen the Lori Ann Halverson case. In subsequent interviews, Sheriff Eric Donnelly said the car's recovery could be the biggest break the county's had in decades. He assigned the case to a special investigations team, featuring two standout names, Tom Kessler, a veteran detective pulled out of retirement, and Maya Collins, the new generation state forensic specialist. Together, they reviewed File M-1271, the yellowed pages, the black and white photos of that year's lake shore, and the statements from those once interrogated. Kessler gazed at Lori's smiling photo in the file and sighed. "I wasn't even born yet that year," he said, "but I'll be the one to bring her home." Collins nodded, her eyes resolute behind her mask. Outside, the first seasonal rain began to fall, washing the grime from the newly unearthed car, as if Lake Menomonee were finally exhaling after 50 years of silence. And from that moment, the entire town of Eau Claire seemed to awaken from a long slumber. News of the car spread everywhere. Those who had known Lori shared memories, old stories were retold, ancient secrets stirred up with the lake's mud. Something equal parts dread and hope was rising in everyone's hearts. Perhaps this time, the truth would finally be found. 3 days after the Chevrolet Nova was salvaged, the Wisconsin State Lab officially confirmed the license plate, and VIN matched Lori Ann Halverson's 1971 records, the missing girl from that year. The press called it Time's Miracle. For Dunn County Police, it was the signal to reopen a case many thought buried forever. Sheriff Eric Donnelly called an emergency meeting at county headquarters. On the table lay photocopies of the old files, yellowed paper with worn edges. He scanned the room, voice low. "We might be holding the only chance we have left to bring this girl home." The investigative team was reformed with Tom Kessler at its core, who had stumbled upon the case file years ago as a young officer. Now nearing 70, with silver hair but sharp eyes, Kessler agreed to return without pay, saying simply, "I owe this town an answer." Joining him was Maya Collins, the new generation forensic investigator, a graduate of the Madison Forensic Science Institute. Collins brought a modern perspective, DNA analysis, micro-trace recovery techniques, and especially forensic genealogy, tracing genetic data through public family trees. The car was moved to a special preservation chamber, placed on a metal cradle, to draw out moisture and clean every detail. Collins and the forensics team sampled mud, paint chips, and fabric fibers stuck to the seats. A small fragment on the driver's seatbelt was found to contain human DNA traces, faint but analyzable. "This could be the key," she said. The sample was rushed to the state-level lab in Madison for modern DNA processing. They knew 2021 technology could read biological traces from just a few cells. Meanwhile, Kessler combed through the entire old witness file. Most had passed away or moved away, only a handful remained around Eau Claire. He tracked them down, listening to faded memories. "I remember that night, the snow was real thick," one said. "There was a big noise like a crash, but I figured it was just a car skidding." Every tiny detail was noted. Evan Cole, Lori's boyfriend from back then, was mentioned too. The file showed he'd been a suspect, but never charged, leaving the state in 1973. No one knew where he was now. Kessler just jotted in the margin, "Rule nothing out." In his small office, Kessler spread an old map across the desk, connecting dots between Regis High School, Lori's home, and Lake Menomonee. The route was just over 5 miles, but for 50 years, it had seemed an uncrossable gulf. "If the car sank here, someone helped it into the water," he told Collins. "It couldn't have been just an accident. At that depth, it takes force and know-how." Collins nodded, her eyes fixed on the crime scene photos. Word of the reinvestigation spread fast. Locals gossiped again, old articles were dug out, Lori's name returned to headlines. The Halverson family, now just a niece living in Florida, sent a letter thanking the investigators for not forgetting her. In a brief press conference, Sheriff Donnelly affirmed, "We're not promising to crack the case, but this time we have tools no one had 50 years ago." Outside the window, rain pattered steadily on the lake's surface, revived after the drought. The red car, shrouded in white sheeting, lay silent in storage like a witness waiting to be heard. For Kessler and Collins, This wasn't just an investigation, it was a journey to restore a whole town's memory, one long buried under deep silt, now surfacing alongside the truth. 3 weeks later, the Wisconsin State Lab sent the DNA analysis results to Dunn County headquarters. In the sealed envelope, the report was just a few pages, but enough to silence the entire team as they read. The biological sample from the seatbelt in the Chevrolet Nova belonged to an adult male, not in the state criminal database. That meant he hadn't been convicted before, but it was still the biggest lead since 1971. Investigator Maya Collins proposed transferring the sample to a forensic genealogy partner center, a public genetic database specializing in tracing blood relations through family trees. Sheriff Donnelly approved, and within days, the data was uploaded to the family tree DNA system. The first results came faster than expected. The system identified a distant link, about fourth cousin, with a Lowell family branch in Chippewa Falls, just over 20 miles from Eau Claire. That surname stopped Kessler cold. He looked up at Collins. Lowell wasn't Richard Lowell, the lieutenant in charge of the search back then. She nodded, eyes wide with surprise. The room fell into a brief hush. No one said it aloud, but the same thought raced through their minds. If true, this would be the biggest shock the town had ever faced. To avoid errors, Collins sent the sample to an independent lab in Minnesota for verification. The results matched. The DNA structure showed close relation to the Lowell line. Kessler obtained a warrant for trash samples from Richard Lowell's home, now 83. He lived with his wife in a small house in Chippewa Falls. The warrant was signed within 24 hours. An undercover team visited the quiet neighborhood, collecting empty soda cans, tissues, and cigarette butts from the curbside bin. All evidence was sealed and shipped straight to the Madison lab. 2 weeks later, the official answer arrived. The DNA match between the seatbelt sample from Lori's car and Lowell's trash was a perfect hit. Probability of error, 1 in 10 trillion. Maya Collins set the paper down, taking a deep breath. No mistaking it, she said. Kessler went still, feeling the floor shift beneath him. The man once hailed as a hero in the search was now the prime suspect. The team convened in closed session immediately. Sheriff Donnelly stressed utmost caution. If this is real, we're touching a bomb. They reviewed the entire 1971 original file and discovered Lowell had omitted logging some search areas around the lake, including the car's discovery spot. He was also the only one with access to the original scene reports before archiving. The pieces began fitting in ways no one had anticipated. Kessler stared at an old photo of young Lowell, tall build, stern face, hard eyes. I used to respect him, he murmured. Collins replied softly, maybe that's why no one ever suspected. They agreed on the next step, approach Lowell under the guise of a historical file review interview, to gauge his reaction before seeking an official arrest warrant. That same day, the press began reporting on the mystery DNA find in the Lori Halverson case, though no name was specified yet. The community buzzed again, but no one imagined the suspect had lived among them for half a century. In the small office, Kessler carefully placed 2 photos on the desk, one of Lori Ann Halverson, her innocent 19-year-old smile, the other of Richard Lowell, the silver-haired ex-lieutenant, who had vowed to never stop searching for that girl. He closed his eyes, sensing how thin the line was between justice and betrayal. Outside, Wisconsin's sky hung gray with clouds, rain sprinkling on the lake's surface, reborn after the drought. For the first time in half a century, Lori's disappearance was no longer a shadow in memory. It had a name, DNA, and a familiar surname, the one no one expected, tied to the final solution of the mystery that had haunted Eau Claire for 50 years. On the morning of October 12, 2021, the sky over Chippewa Falls was thick with fog and cold as steel. 2 investigators, Tom Kessler and Maya Collins, drove an unmarked police car into the quiet neighborhood where Richard Lowell lived. Before them was a 2-story wooden house, painted ivory, with dried flower baskets hanging from the porch, and windows with faded floral curtains. From the outside, it looked as ordinary as any house in the Midwest region, quiet, neat, with no sign of the dark secret harbored by the man inside. Kessler turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and said softly, "We're just talking, no confrontation. Let him open up on his own." Collins nodded. She had brought a copy of the Lori Halverson case file, along with a few photos of the recently salvaged car. Lowell greeted them with a calm demeanor. The 83-year-old man was tall but slightly stooped, with neatly combed silver hair. The house smelled of freshly brewed coffee and toast. "You two are here about the Menomonee case?" he asked, his voice still firm. Kessler smiled, saying they were reviewing historical records and wanted to interview those who had participated in the 1971 search team. Lowell invited them to sit, pouring coffee into 3 cups. The atmosphere at first was light, full of small talk. He recounted the snow-covered days, leading the search team, how he tried to help the Halverson family. His voice was steady, without a tremor, but his eyes darted away every time Collins mentioned Lake Menomonee. When Kessler placed the photo of the rusted Chevrolet Nova on the table, Lowell stared at it for a long time. His hand trembled slightly, then he set down his coffee cup and said quietly, "It's been many years since I've thought about that." Collins asked, "Do you remember the search area that day? We noticed the records are missing a few location logs." Lowell looked up, a smile as thin as a thread. "Oh, old paperwork. That year the snow was so heavy, no one could record accurately." The answer was so smooth, it almost seemed rehearsed. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. There was no breakthrough, but neither could it hide something very small, the cracks in his voice, in the way Lowell avoided their eyes. Before leaving, Kessler asked one final question. "Have you ever gone back to Lake Menomonee since that year?" Lowell paused, looking out the foggy window. "No," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've never wanted to look at that place again." On the way back, Collins opened the recording of the interview, listening to each segment again. There was a moment when Mr. Lowell sighed, a faint tremor when speaking about the car, something an innocent person would hardly have. "He knew where the car was before we mentioned it," she remarked. Kessler just nodded, his eyes still fixed on the long road covered in yellow leaves. In his heart, the respect he once had for the former lieutenant was gradually turning into an indescribable feeling, part disappointment, part pity. That afternoon, they sent all the DNA evidence, along with the interview transcript, to the Wisconsin State Prosecutor's Office. 2 days later, Prosecutor Rebecca Nielsen officially signed the arrest warrant for Richard Lowell on charges of first-degree murder and concealment of a corpse. The news was kept internal, awaiting the announcement. For Kessler and Collins, this was the moment they knew the investigation had entered a point of no return. A secret buried for half a century finally had a face, a name. That night, as Kessler left the office, he stood by the window, looking out at the lake, reflecting the pale moonlight. In his mind echoed the image of Lori Ann Halverson, the 19-year-old girl, leaving the dance in the snowy night, and the man who had promised to find her at any cost. Perhaps that promise had finally been kept, but in a way no one could have imagined. On the morning of October 14, 2021, the pale autumn sunlight of Wisconsin stretched across the small street in Chippewa Falls, where the last maple leaves of the season littered the sidewalks. The police car, without sirens blaring, quietly pulled up in front of Richard Lowell's ivory house. Inside, he was sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper and listening to the radio, the news talking about a long cold case about to have a major breakthrough. He had no idea that minutes later, that breakthrough would be for him. When the door opened, 2 uniformed officers stepped in, followed by investigators Tom Kessler and Maya Collins. "Mr. Lowell," Kessler said slowly, "we have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of murder and concealment of a body in the Lori Ann Halverson case, missing since 1971. The room fell deathly silent. Only the radio played the old tunes of the 1970s, Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water, an eerily fitting coincidence. Lowell sat motionless for a few seconds, then set the newspaper down. He looked at Kessler, not angry, not confused, just as if he had been waiting for this for a very long time. "You're nearly half a century late," he said, his voice low and hoarse. The 2 officers approached to cuff him, reading his Miranda rights. His wife, Helen Lowell, rushed down from upstairs, screaming, "Tom, what's this? He's been retired for 30 years." Kessler just bowed his head, saying nothing. Helen burst into tears, clutching her husband's hand, while he remained silent, his eyes gazing distantly through the window, where leaves swirled in the wind. News of the arrest spread almost immediately. Less than an hour later, WQEW Gel Player news vans were parked in front of the Lowell house, reporters crowding the police tape. They broadcast live footage of the silver-haired man, hands cuffed, being led out of the peaceful home, the once upright symbol of Dunn County law enforcement. A former police officer, arrested on suspicion in the 1971 disappearance. Shocking news for Wisconsin, the anchor read, voice choking. Residents gathered along both sides of the road, many unable to believe their eyes. A middle-aged woman burst into tears. "He taught me driver's ed in school. It can't be." At Dunn County Sheriff's headquarters, Lowell was taken to the interrogation room. He maintained his composure, sitting upright, hands placed in front of him. When Maya Collins read his rights again, he nodded slightly. "I understand," he said. "I used to do this job." While the investigators prepared the files, outside, a horde of reporters waited, cameras aimed at every window. The story of the hero turned suspect had the whole state buzzing. That same day, Sheriff Eric Donnelly held a press conference. Before dozens of lenses, he spoke briefly. "Based on DNA results and new evidence, we have arrested Richard Lowell. The investigation continues, but we believe this is a significant step toward the truth." When asked his thoughts on arresting a former colleague, Donnelly simply replied, "No one is above justice, no matter who they are." Meanwhile, the Halverson family in Florida received a call from the Dunn County Sheriff's Office. The only surviving niece, Karen Halverson, later recounted that she trembled upon hearing the name Lowell. "He used to comfort my grandmother for years. She believed he was the only one who never gave up. I couldn't believe it was him." Karen's voice choked with tears. That evening, the TV news replayed old footage. 1971, Lieutenant Lowell in uniform, standing by Lake Menomonee, directing the search amid the blizzard. That image was juxtaposed with today's footage, the silver-haired old man, being escorted in the afternoon shadows. Two moments, two men, half a century apart, but one and the same. On social media, debates raged. Some called him a hidden monster, others suspected the police were scapegoating for a case dragged on too long. As night fell, Chippewa Falls was unusually quiet. The Lowell house was sealed off, lights out, only the yellow tape gleaming under patrol car lights. At Lake Menomonee, the wind rose again, rippling the water as if whispering something to the darkness. 50 years ago, he had promised the community he would find Lori Ann Halverson, and now, that promise had been fulfilled, only he was no longer the one honored for it. News of Richard Lowell's arrest spread like wildfire across dry prairie. In just 2 days, every major Wisconsin newspaper carried his photo on the front page, the former police lieutenant once honored for dedication and integrity. Headlines screamed, "Yesterday's hero turns murder suspect, in 50-year-old case." In Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls, and Dunn County, everyone was stunned. Those who had known Lowell couldn't believe it, while younger folks said they were witnessing the fall of a local legend. A town that once revered him as a symbol of justice, now had to ask itself, had justice ever truly existed? St. Olaf Church, where a prayer vigil for Lori had been held in 1971, was packed for the Sunday morning service. After the arrest news, the atmosphere was heavy, faces bowed, prayers rising slowly. The priest stood at the pulpit, voice deep, "We pray for Lori's soul, and for all those who have lost the light within themselves." No one said it aloud, but everyone knew that line was for Richard Lowell. After the service, residents gathered in the churchyard, talking non-stop. "I once let him teach my son to drive," one said. "Unbelievable." Another replied, "If it's him, then all these years we've been living next to a killer without knowing." At Dunn County Sheriff's headquarters, phones rang off the hook. National media called, from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel to the New York Times, all eager to dig into the story of the former officer investigating himself. The Public Information Office had to hold an emergency press conference, affirming the investigation was conducted rigorously, without bias. But outside, waves of doubt still swelled. Some residents filed petitions to reopen a slew of old cases Lowell had handled. Many who once praised him now tore down his photo from the old sheriff's building walls. Others protested, "None of us know for sure what happened. Let justice do its work." The Halverson family returned to Wisconsin after nearly half a century. Niece Karen, with her 2 children, visited Lake Menomonee, bringing a bouquet of white roses. They stood silently looking at the rippling water where the car had been pulled up. "My grandmother used to dream of Lori every night," Karen told reporters. "I only wish she were alive to see this day, painful as it is. At least there's an answer." Those words brought tears to many eyes. That evening, a spontaneous candlelight vigil took place by the lake. Hundreds gathered, holding candles, the wind flickering their fragile flames. A large photo of Lori was placed amid a circle of white flowers, next to a sign reading, "50 years waiting for justice." The priest led a prayer, reminding that even the weakest light is enough to dispel the darkness that had shrouded this place for so long. In the crowd, people prayed and whispered about Lowell, some angry, some pitying. "He used to be a good man," an elderly woman said softly, "but sometimes the good ones hide the worst things." As night fell, the candles along the lake shore reflected shimmering on the water, like hundreds of tiny stars adrift. Eau Claire, the town that once slumbered in memory, now awoke in turmoil, pained yet relieved. For no matter how cruel the truth, at least it had shattered the silence that had weighed on this land for 50 years. The interrogation took place on the morning of October 16, 2021, in a small room on the second floor of the Dunn County Sheriff's Office. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the cold glow of fluorescent lights. On the table lay a thick file folder, a few photos of the crime scene, and a DNA report clipped in a clear plastic sleeve. Richard Lowell sat in the middle chair, his hands neatly placed on the table. Despite being held for 2 nights, he maintained a calm demeanor, his face expressionless. Facing him were investigator Tom Kessler and forensic specialist Maya Collins, 2 people who had uncovered the truth after half a century. A small silver tape recorder blinked with a red light. Kessler began in a low, steady but firm voice. "Mr. Lowell, we're not here to hear you recount the past. We're here to talk about the night of December 17, 1971, the night Lori Ann Halverson disappeared. Where were you?" Lowell looked down, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "I've already stated it," he said, his voice hoarse. "I was at home, received a call at 2 a.m. from Mrs. Halverson. I arrived at the scene the next morning." Kessler slid a photo of the rusted Chevrolet Nova toward him. "This is her car, found at the bottom of the lake where you once led the search team. We have your DNA on the seatbelt. Would you like to explain?" For a few seconds, the room was utterly silent. Lowell looked up, his gaze wavering between Kessler and Collins. "DNA, after 50 years, it could be a mistake." Collins interrupted, her voice cold and even. "There's no mistake here. We've compared 2 independent labs. The probability of error is 1 in 10 trillion. You were in that car, Richard. The question is, why?" He took a deep breath, giving a faint smile. "You make it sound like a movie. I led that case, of course I sat in a similar car. I didn't kill anyone." Kessler leaned forward, his eyes sharpening. "You didn't kill anyone, but you lied. In the search report, you noted that the east side of the lake was surveyed, while the search team insists no one was allowed there because the ice was too thin. So why did Lori's car end up right there?" Lowell fell silent. He clasped his hands, looked down at the table, and let out a very soft sigh. Then he spoke, his voice slow, as if each word weighed heavily. "I went there, alone. I thought I might find her." Collins asked, "Did you meet Lori that night?" Lowell didn't answer right away. After a moment, he nodded. "She left the dance early. I happened to see her car parked by the road near the lake. It was very cold out. I stopped to ask if she needed help. We talked, just a few minutes." He paused, swallowing hard. "She said she had argued with her boyfriend and didn't want to go home right away. I said I could drive her around the lake to calm down. I swear, at first there was no bad intention." Kessler didn't take his eyes off him. "And what happened after that?" Lowell rubbed his forehead, trembling. "She wanted to stop the car, said she'd drive herself home. But when I tried to talk, she panicked, opened the door and ran. I grabbed her hand, just to hold her back. She slipped, fell down the embankment. I didn't mean to hurt her." He broke off, his voice choking. "She didn't move anymore. I went down to check. She was unconscious. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." Collins looked at Kessler. The room filled with the faint crackle of the tape recorder. "You were scared, so you pushed the car into the lake?" she asked. Lowell nodded weakly. "I didn't think, I just wanted to cover it up. When the snow started falling, I thought the water would wash everything away. I came back the next morning, as a police officer, and led the search team in the opposite direction. No one suspected." Kessler clenched his fist. "You let the whole town live in a lie for 50 years. Her family believed you were the only one who cared. Do you know they wrote you thank you letters for 20 years? Lowell bowed his head. An aged tear fell onto the photo of young Lori smiling radiantly. I know, he whispered. I read every one. I didn't deserve it. Collins closed the file folder, her voice decisive. Do you want to add anything to your statement? Lowell looked at them, his eyes red-rimmed. Just one thing. I didn't mean to kill her. It was an accident. But when I pushed that car into the lake, I killed myself. When Kessler turned off the tape recorder, the room held only the howl of wind outside the window and the heavy breathing of 3 people. The interrogation ended, but its aftermath left both investigators silent for a long time. They hadn't just heard a confession. They had witnessed a man collapse under the weight of his own past, and somewhere out there, Menomonee Lake remained silent, as if it had known everything for a very long time, just waiting for the man to be ready to admit it. After the interrogation ended, the investigation room stayed lit all night. Outside, cold rain poured, each drop falling steadily on the window, reflecting the yellow light spilling from the room where Richard Lowell sat, his hands trembling slightly on a cup of cold coffee. He had confessed to pushing the car into the lake, but in his account there were still gaps, details that both Tom Kessler and Maya Collins felt hadn't been fully revealed. The next day, they decided to interrogate him once more, this time not to seek a confession, but to find the complete truth. When Kessler entered, Lowell was already seated, his gaze quietly fixed on the rain-streaked window. I couldn't sleep, he said before anyone could ask. Every time I close my eyes, I see that girl's face and that black lake. Kessler turned on the tape recorder again, gently. We need you to recount exactly what happened after Lori fell. You said she was unconscious. Are you sure she was dead? Lowell shook his head slowly. I don't know. She wasn't moving, but she still had warmth. I was scared. Didn't dare check thoroughly. I panicked. He hesitated, his voice choking. I picked her up, put her in the back seat of the car. I intended to take her to the hospital, but then, I thought no one would believe me. A police officer, late at night, a young girl. No one would listen to my explanation. Collins interjected, her voice calm but sharply cold. So you decided to hide her body? Lowell nodded faintly, his hands clasped together, nails digging into his skin. I drove to the edge of the lake, where the ice was just forming. I released the parking brake, let the car slide down. I thought, if the car sank, the snow would cover everything. No one would find her, and no one would know I'd been there. He paused, exhaling sharply. I just wanted everything to disappear. But every winter, when I hear the wind whistling over the lake, it feels like someone's calling my name. Kessler observed his expression, then asked slowly, you said you picked her up into the car, meaning Lori's body wasn't in the car when we found it. What did you do with her after that? Lowell was silent for a very long time. The sound of rain outside drowned out even the tape recorder. Finally, he spoke, almost in a whisper. I didn't push her down with the car. I was afraid she'd float up, so I took her to the woods north of the lake, where I used to hunt deer as a young man. I buried her there, under a big maple tree. I thought the ice would cover it. No one would discover. Collins turned to Kessler, her eyes flashing. This was the detail they had never known. Can you show us that location? She asked. Lowell nodded weakly. I remember it very clearly, even after 50 years. There's a rotten log shaped like a V, and a small stream flowing around. I'll take you there. I've carried this secret too long. The air in the room grew suffocatingly heavy. Kessler turned off the tape recorder, and stood up. We'll prepare the forensics team, he said. If you're telling the truth, we'll find her. Lowell didn't respond, just closed his eyes slightly, his shoulders shaking, as if a burden had been lifted. I've lived half my life in lies, he whispered. Maybe this is the only way I can find peace. As they left the room, Kessler looked through the reflective glass. The man once seen as a role model for the whole town, now sat alone in the brightly lit room, his face etched with exhaustion and regret. Rain still fell outside, mingling with distant thunder. Somewhere in the woods, Lowell mentioned, under the cold damp soil, the bones of Lori Ann Halverson might still lie, the final piece of the story that had made all of Eau Claire wait for half a century. 2 days after Richard Lowell's statement, the Wisconsin State Forensics Team along with the Dunn County Investigation Group arrived at the woods north of Menomonee Lake. The October sky was thickly gray, wind rushing through the bare maple branches, the damp cold smell of earth and decaying leaves mingling together. Under the heavy clouds, The woods looked like a place time had forgotten, desolate, silent, with only the crunch of boots on dry twigs echoing in the vast space. Lowell was brought along, hands cuffed, his face gaunt. He remained silent as the vehicles drove deep into the woods, occasionally glancing out the window as if counting each tree in his memory. When the convoy stopped by a small stream, he pointed. There, the big maple, with a dent in the trunk. She's there. The forensics team immediately cordoned off the area. Yellow tape strung around the old maple, high-powered lights turned on even though it was still daylight. Maya Collins led the technical team, signaling the staff to start digging the soft soil around the base with shovels and trowels. Kessler stood nearby, his eyes never leaving Lowell, who now sat on a folding chair, hands trembling. He watched them work like a witness reliving his own past. No one spoke. Everyone understood they were standing on the boundary between suspicion and truth. About an hour later, the technician's trowel hit something hard. "There's something here," he called out. Collins knelt down, gently brushing away the soil with a brush, and gradually a small skeletal frame emerged. A portion of a human skull appeared amid the dark brown earth. Next to it a fragment of cream-colored fabric, turned gray, possibly once Laurie's blouse. The air suddenly grew so heavy that all sound seemed swallowed up. Kessler removed his hat, bowed his head. "We found her," he said softly. The exhumation work lasted until late afternoon. Each bone fragment was carefully extracted, arranged on a white cloth, labeled and photographed. Among the evidence, the most prominent was a silver maple leaf necklace, the item Laurie often wore, noted in the 1971 missing persons file. When Collins picked it up, the faint late-day light reflected off the tarnished silver, like a flickering candle in the darkness. Beside it, they also found a turquoise hair clip, still intact in shape. "No doubt anymore," Collins said, her voice faltering. "This is her." Lowell watched the scene from afar, his deep-set eyes wet. He tried to say something, but his throat caught. Finally, he just murmured, "Thank you for bringing her home." Kessler didn't respond. He stood still watching the sealed bag containing the necklace placed into the evidence box, then turned away. In that moment, he felt both relieved and empty, as if all the years of investigation, all the files, all the sleepless nights converged on a single point, this maple tree, where a 19-year-old girl had been swallowed by time for 50 years. As dusk fell, a light drizzle began to fall. The team packed up their equipment, placing the last evidence bags into the vehicles. Collins looked at the maple tree, now just a deep hole in the ground, and said quietly, "We've finished half the story." Kessler replied, his voice heavy, "The rest belongs to the courts and forgiveness." The vehicle carrying the remains left the woods, rolling slowly along the muddy trail. Behind Richard Lowell sat in the police car, hands cuffed in front of his chest, eyes fixed on the window. He watched the passing trees, as if each trunk was a memory, each bend in the woods a reminder. When the car reached the main road, the blue and red lights swept across the forest, reflecting off the bare maple branches, illuminating the entire area for a moment, like a farewell ritual. The next day, the Dunn County Sheriff's Office held a press conference to confirm the remains found at the scene have been identified as belonging to Laurie Ann Halverson. The news spread across the state, closing a half-century search. But for those present in the woods that day, the image of the solitary maple amid the rain remained deeply etched in their minds, like a reminder that truth, no matter how long buried, will eventually find its way back to the light. On October 21, 2021, just 3 days after Laurie Ann Halverson's remains were confirmed, the Dunn County Prosecutor's Office officially announced the indictment of Richard Lowell on 3 charges: second-degree manslaughter, concealing a human body, and tampering with evidence during the investigation. The announcement took place at the county courthouse in Menomonee, under a gloomy sky that seemed to deliberately add a darker hue to that day. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded, cameras lined up. The image of an elderly man with silver hair, gaunt, being escorted out of the prison van by 2 police officers, quickly became a symbol of the collapse of faith in a once peaceful town. No more officer's hat, no more badge of honor, just the wrinkled orange prison jumpsuit and the downcast face of the man once considered the hero of 1971. In the courtroom, Judge Mary Kincaid presided over the initial arraignment hearing. The spectator seats were full, with many residents from Eau Claire and Chippewa Falls, coming all the way to witness it. In the front row, Karen Halverson, Lori's niece, sat silently, her hand clutching the silver maple leaf necklace that the police had returned to the family after the exhumation. When Lowell entered, her eyes lifted to look at him, not with anger, just a weary sadness. He glanced over, his eyes meeting hers for a moment, then quickly turned away. Prosecutor Rebecca Nielsen read the indictment in a clear voice, each sentence like a knife cutting through the air. Richard Lowell, you are charged with causing the death of Lori Ann Halverson, born in 1952, on the night of December 17, 1971. After the victim died, you deliberately pushed the car into Lake Menomonee to erase traces, then buried the body in the forest north of the lake. You kept this secret for 50 years, obstructing the investigation and preventing the victim's family from ever finding peace. Lowell only lifted his head once when he heard Lori's name, his voice hoarse. I never wanted to kill her. It was an accident. Defense attorney Douglas Merritt requested that the court consider the factors of lack of intent and panic-induced psychological disorder. He said Lowell had lived half his life in remorse, without fleeing, without reoffending, and that he himself had led the police to the burial site. But the prosecutor immediately countered, remorse doesn't erase 50 years of lies. He didn't confess out of conscience, but because DNA technology forced him to face it. The statement made the courtroom fall deathly silent, only the sound of the judge's pen tapping rhythmically on the table remaining. When the hearing paused, reporters rushed outside. The evening news across the state opened with footage of Lowell bowing his head as he left the courtroom, hands cuffed, walking between two young police officers. Under the description, the ticker scrolled across the screen, after 50 years, justice finally has a face. That night, the Dunn County Jail was quiet. In cell number 4 in solitary confinement, Richard Lowell sat leaning against the wall, eyes staring fixedly at the ceiling. He didn't speak, didn't sleep, only occasionally murmuring a name softly, Lori. On the other side of town, candles still burned by Lake Menomonee, where residents had placed flowers in memorial. Between that darkness and light, justice had set its wheels in motion, slow but unstoppable. In November 2021, the town of Eau Claire entered winter earlier than usual. Snow fell thickly covering the surface of Lake Menomonee, where just a month earlier it had been the focus of the entire state. Inside the Dunn County Courthouse, as everyone prepared to celebrate Thanksgiving, the prosecution team and defense lawyers were busy with another task, preparing for Richard Lowell's trial, scheduled to begin early next year. Every eye in the community, from the media, former colleagues, to the residents who once trusted him, was fixed on the legal battle, said to expose the full truth of 50 years of deception. In the prosecutor's office, Rebecca Nielsen spread out stacks of files, crime scene photos, DNA reports on the table. She and legal assistant Mark Jensen worked late into the night every day, combing through every detail in Lowell's statement to reconstruct the sequence of events. His weakness is the contradiction, Rebecca said, holding the recording of the interrogation. He says Lori slipped and fell, but her DNA appears inside his jacket sleeve. That means there was a struggle. Mark nodded, adding, we also have Lori's nail marks on his left wrist from the 1971 skin sample. It's faint, but it shows she fought back. Rebecca looked at the photo of Lori smiling in the file, the youthful face buried for half a century, and said softly, she deserves to have her voice heard again in court. On the opposite side, defense attorney Douglas Merritt's office was also lit up all night. Merritt, who had been Lowell's old classmate at the Milwaukee Police Academy, took the case not just for the fame, but because of a debt of friendship. He knew he couldn't deny the physical evidence, so he focused the defense on psychology and circumstances. We'll build the story of an accident, a snowy night, two lost souls, Merritt said to his team. He flipped through Lowell's medical records, pointing to the doctor's notes. Here, he has prolonged stress disorder, chronic insomnia, depression after his first wife died. We can prove he panicked, couldn't control his actions. The assistant asked, but what about hiding the body for 50 years? Merritt was silent for a moment, then replied, that's the guilt, and will make the jury believe that guilt has been his punishment for half his life. While both sides prepared, the media missed no detail. UQ Dabo News 18 aired a multi-part special titled, The Fall of the Hero, recounting Richard Lowell's journey from model officer to murder suspect. Interviews with former colleagues, interspersed with 1971 archival footage, scenes of him leading the rescue team, the car being pulled from the lake, and finally him being handcuffed and led away. An elderly resident said on television, "If he's guilty, then we're at fault too, for believing in him too long." At the Dunn County Jail, Lowell remained silent. He refused to meet the press, only accepting a few short sessions with attorney Merritt. In one, Merritt asked, "Richard, if you really want me to help, I need to know every detail. Is there anything you haven't told me?" Lowell looked at him for a long time, then shook his head slightly. "I've said it all. It's just, I didn't think people would see me as a monster. I always thought I was just a coward." Merritt replied softly, "Sometimes between cowardice and crime, there's only a very short step." Meanwhile, Karen Halverson was invited to serve as a family representative witness. That afternoon, she came to the prosecutor's office, bringing Lori's silver necklace, now polished again. Rebecca told her, "When you take the stand, tell the jury about Lori the person not as a victim, but as the one the whole town lost." Karen nodded, her voice trembling. "I will, because she doesn't have the chance to speak anymore." Time passed slowly in the frigid winter. Every morning, Lake Menomonee was shrouded in fog, as if holding on to the last breath of the unfinished story. At the courthouse, file cabinets were sealed, evidence resealed in plastic bags, all waiting for the day the trial opened. And in the jail, Richard Lowell counted each day in silence. He knew that when the snow melted and spring came, it would be time for him to face not just the court, but his entire past. And somewhere out there, the wind over Lake Menomonee still blew, as if reminding that justice, though late, was drawing near. On March 7, 2022, Richard Lowell's trial officially began at the Dunn County Courthouse in Wisconsin. The day was bitterly cold, snow falling so heavily that the courthouse gates had to be cleared multiple times. But outside, hundreds of people still waited, braving the chill, to witness the moment called the trial of the small century, the case that closed 50 years of silence. When the wooden doors opened, Lowell was brought into the courtroom, hands trembling, his gaunt face hidden under white silver hair. Reporters jostled to capture every moment. On the other side, Karen Halverson sat with Lori's relatives, her face stern, eyes red-rimmed. On the table in front of her, the silver maple leaf necklace, the symbol of memory and loss, was placed in a small glass case, like a silent witness. Prosecutor Rebecca Nielsen opened with the trial's opening statement, her voice ringing clear in the hushed space. "This is not just a case about a death, this is a story of betrayal, of a man once entrusted with upholding justice, but who buried it under ice and lies for half a century." Lori Ann Halverson didn't just lose her life that night, she was robbed of her voice, and today we will give it back. The entire courtroom was deathly silent. Nielsen presented the evidence, the matching DNA results, the exhumation site, the confession, and the forensic report showing signs of a struggle before death. Each detail was arranged by her carefully, logically, like threading together the shattered pieces of the past, to reconstruct the fateful night of 1971. When it was the defense's turn, Attorney Douglas Merritt stepped forward, his face stern but calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we do not deny the mistake, but please do not confuse mistake with crime. Richard Lowell is not a monster, he is a man, weak, afraid, and tormented by an accident he could not undo. 1 minute of panic should not erase a lifetime of dedication." Merritt addressed the jury, his voice slow. "Look at those trembling hands, hands that once saved people from floods, that once guided residents through blizzards. Ask yourselves, is this the hand of a cold-blooded killer?" The trial lasted many days. The first witness was Maya Collins, the investigator who reopened the file. She recounted the process of discovering the DNA, the match, and Lowell's confession. "He didn't lie to protect anyone else. He lied to protect his own image," Collins said, her voice firm. Next was Karen Halverson, representing the victim's family. When she took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She told of the 19-year-old girl who dreamed of becoming an artist, of the letters her grandmother still wrote to Lori, though never receiving a reply. 50 years, we don't seek revenge," Karen said, her voice choking. "We just want her acknowledged as a victim, not a forgotten missing person." The most intense part of the trial came when Richard Lowell was called to the stand. He didn't need assistance, walking slowly but steadily. Before the prosecutor's questions, he didn't deny. "I met her that night," he said, his voice raspy. "I just wanted to comfort her, but she was afraid of me. When she slipped and fell, I thought she was dead. I panicked. I didn't have the courage to confess, and from that night, I haven't lived a real day since." A few people in the audience shed tears, but Nielsen showed no mercy. You say you haven't lived really, but you were free, while Lori lay in the cold ground. Do you call that fair? Lowell bowed his head. No, but if I could tell her sorry today, I would. The trial lasted nearly 2 weeks. When the prosecution and defense finished their closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate for 6 hours. Outside, snow still fell, the sky sunk in pale gray. At dusk they returned. The tension in the courtroom was like a taut string. The foreman asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood, voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. We find the defendant Richard Lowell guilty of second-degree manslaughter and concealing a human body." The only sound after that was the judge's pen tapping on the table. Karen Halverson closed her eyes, tears streaming down, and Richard Lowell, sitting still, showed no reaction, only nodding slightly, as if accepting what he had perhaps known for a very long time, that finally, the truth had found its voice. On the morning of March 15, 2022, the Dunn County Courthouse was packed. Outside, dozens of reporters set up cameras. TV vans lined the street all the way to the end of the block. All of Wisconsin seemed to pause, waiting for the official verdict in the case that had haunted this land for half a century. As the courtroom doors opened, Richard Lowell was led in. He wore an old gray suit, his silver hair neatly combed, but his face was gaunt after nearly half a year in custody. His hands trembled as they clenched, as if his body itself sensed the weight of the moment approaching. In the back row, Karen Halverson gripped Lori's silver necklace tightly, eyes closed, silently praying. Judge Mary Kincaid entered, the wooden gavel striking 3 times, echoing through the room. She spoke briefly, sentencing hearing. The state of Wisconsin versus Richard Lowell. Her voice was low and clear, but it couldn't hide the emotion. The jury has found the defendant guilty of second-degree manslaughter and concealment of a corpse. Based on the severity of the act, the length of the concealment, and the mental impact on the community, the court sentences Richard Lowell to 25 years in prison without parole, plus 10 years of supervised release. A wave of sound surged up, sobs, murmurs, then silence. Lowell said nothing. He just nodded slightly, lips moving. "I understand." Kessler and Collins, standing behind with the police, looked at him without knowing whether to feel victory or loss. Collins whispered, "No one wins in this case." Kessler replied softly, "Only the truth, and it always exacts its price." Prosecutor Rebecca Nielsen stepped out of the courthouse amid a forest of microphones and lenses. She spoke calmly but firmly. "Today justice has been served, though belatedly. We weren't seeking revenge, only the truth for a girl forgotten for 50 years. When asked if the sentence was heavy enough, she replied, "No sentence is enough to bring the dead back, but there are sentences that allow the living to sleep peacefully." Inside, Karen Halverson approached Richard Lowell as he was led away by police. She stopped 1 step away, looking straight at him, not with hatred, not with anger, just a sadness softened after years of waiting. "You took her from us," she said, her voice choked but steady, "but at least you brought her back." Lowell paused, tears welling up. "I'm sorry," he said, just 3 words, light as breath, but enough to make the entire hallway fall silent. That afternoon, the news aired across the state. The final image before the screen switched to the weather forecast was the moment Richard Lowell stepped into the prison van, the iron door closing, reflecting the dim afternoon sunlight of Eau Claire. The ticker across the bottom of the screen read, "End to a 50-year case. Justice comes late, but it comes." That evening, by Lake Menomonee, residents gathered again to light candles. The snow had stopped falling, the lake surface calm like a giant silver mirror. A ribbon of golden light shimmered across the water, where Lori had once vanished. The priest read a short prayer. "We cannot change the past, but we can let the truth guide the future." Everyone bowed their heads, and in that moment, the wind whispered through, carrying the sound of water lapping the shore, like the gentle sigh of a soul finally at rest. And in the cold cell, Richard Lowell sat leaning against the wall, eyes fixed on the small window where moonlight streamed in. He whispered to himself, "She's been found, Lori." For the first time in 50 years, he smiled faintly, the smile of a sinner, but at least one who had finally faced the truth. Spring 2022 came late, but for the town of Eau Claire, it brought a feeling like stepping into a new era. After the court's verdict, there were no more frenzied news reports, no more camera lights aimed at every house along Lake Menomonee. The town returned to quiet, but it was the quiet of those who had weathered a storm. On the lake shore, where the crime scene had once been, the authorities erected a small gray stone plaque inscribed with "In memory of Lori Ann Halverson, 1952-1971. Justice may come late, but the light never fades." On the dedication day, the sky was clear, the breeze gentle, residents bringing flowers, candles, and old photos. Karen Halverson stood before the plaque, placing Lori's silver necklace on the stone, then whispered, "You're home now, Lori." No one said another word, but the entire crowd bowed their heads, a belated but sincere farewell. At the Eau Claire Daily Journal newsroom, young reporter Sophie Turner wrote a 3-page wrap-up article, published in the Sunday edition. The piece was titled "The Guardian of Justice, and the Secret That Killed Him." She recounted Richard Lowell's story, not just as a criminal, but as a tragic symbol, a man who lost himself on the boundary between duty and fear. "This town once trusted him," Sophie wrote, "and now, by forgiving, we can let that memory rest with him." The article spread across the state, bringing tears to many, not out of pity, but because they realized that justice is not just punishment, but also understanding. A few weeks later, the Dunn County Sheriff's Office officially closed the file on the disappearance of Lori Ann Halverson. In the archives room, Tom Kessler was the one to place the file in the final drawer. He stood silently, looking at the bold printed words, "Closed Case, March 2022, on the cover. Maya Collins, now promoted to lieutenant, stepped up beside him. "You once told me no case ever really ends," she said. Kessler smiled wearily. "That's true, but sometimes, it can be laid down." He closed the file cabinet, the key clicking like a ritual ending to 50 years of pursuit. In the Waupun State Prison, Richard Lowell began serving his sentence. He was assigned to the unit for elderly inmates. The guards said he lived quietly, spoke little, often spending mornings reading the Bible and afternoons sitting looking out the small window facing north, where hundreds of miles away lay Lake Menomonee. One June day, he sent a handwritten letter to Karen Halverson. Just a few short lines. "Thank you for giving me the chance to tell the truth. I know I can't make amends, but I hope you believe I never forgot Lori, never stopped wishing that night I'd stopped and called for help." Karen didn't reply. She just folded the letter, placing it beside Lori's photo and necklace, 3 pieces of memory encapsulating half a century. In August, Lake Menomonee gleamed under golden sunlight. Children played on the grass, while elders fished by the water's edge. Life gradually returned to normal. But every evening, the wind from the lake still carried a strange feeling, like an echo of time, a reminder that this place once buried a secret, and people, no matter how they try to forget, are always touched by the past. Maya Collins once said in her final interview, "This case taught me one thing: sometimes justice isn't the end, but the moment we dare to look straight at the truth, no matter how painful." And so, the story of Lori Ann Halverson, the girl who vanished into the snowy night of 1971, came to a close. But in the hearts of those who remained, she was never just a victim. She was a reminder that justice, even if delayed by half a century, always finds its way back. Fall 2023 brought Eau Claire under a canopy of golden maples, but the atmosphere in the town had changed forever. More than a year after the trial ended, the Lori Ann Halverson case was still mentioned in every coffee shop, every school meeting, like a scar that would never fade in the small community by Lake Menomonee. People called it the longest winter, not just because of the weather, but because the shadow of doubt had enveloped an entire generation. 2 names, Lori Halverson and Richard Lowell, became opposing symbols, a forgotten girl and a self-destroying hero. After the case, the town changed to its core. The Dunn County Sheriff's Office reopened a series of old files under the Cold Case Initiative, led by Lieutenant Maya Collins. Her office wall held only one black and white photo, Lori smiling radiantly by the lake, taken in 1971. "We do this for her," Maya said in the first team meeting. The words became the team's motto. In 3 years the group helped resolve 4 more backlog cases, leading residents to call Lori the guide for unrested souls. On the other side of the lake, Karen Halverson returned to Wisconsin after years in Florida. She lived in a small house near the water, and began volunteering as a speaker, sharing her family's story with students. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said in one talk. "I can't forget, but I can stop letting anger control me. Justice has been served, and that's enough." After the talk, Karen walked to Lori's memorial plaque, the simple gray stone inscribed, "Justice may come late, but the light never fades. She placed Lori's silver necklace there, whispering, "You're home now." In Waupun Prison, Richard Lowell lived out his remaining days in silence. He read the Bible, wrote letters to the priest, and joined the program writing to victims' families. In one letter he wrote, "I once thought snow could hide sin, but no snow is thick enough to bury the truth. I killed 2 people that night, that girl and myself." The confession was read aloud by Father Benedict during that winter's church service, leaving many silent. In December 2023, Lowell died in his sleep at age 85. The local news reported it briefly. Richard Lowell, inmate #4873, dies of natural causes. The next day residents brought flowers to place by Lori's plaque. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. Finally, everything had closed. Father Benedict read a short prayer for 2 souls, one robbed of life, and one imprisoned by sin. The wind blew across the lake, like time's gentle sigh. As winter passed, life in Eau Claire gradually returned to peace. The coffee shop where Lori had waitressed was renovated, hanging a photo of Lake Menomonee with the words "In memory of Lori, 1971. Schools recounted the case as part of local history curriculum, emphasizing lessons on truth and perseverance. Every March, residents held the Menomonee Light Walk, a procession around the lake, with hundreds of paper lanterns. As the lights reflected on the water, they chanted together, "For Lori, for truth." Tom Kessler, now retired, still lived in his small house overlooking the lake. Each morning, he brewed coffee, gazing through the foggy window at what had once been the scene. On his desk he kept the original photo of the spot where Lori's body was found. He once told Maya, "No secret stays buried forever, we just delay the day it surfaces." Maya, now head of the Special Investigations Unit, still visited him occasionally, bringing new cases. "Lori's still helping us," she said, and Kessler just nodded. Yes, she never really left. As dusk fell over Lake Menomonee, the last sunlight bathed the water in gold. Children's laughter rang out, wind rustling through the maples. Life had gone on, but in the hearts of Eau Claire's people, the echo of a story that never grew old lingered. They say that sometimes, when the wind blows just right, you can hear the whisper of a young girl, light as breath, but clear as a reminder, the truth always finds its way back. The Lori Ann Halverson case didn't just close a dark chapter, but opened a new one for the entire community. It taught the people here that justice can be delayed, but never disappears, that no matter how long the darkness covers, the light will still seep through the smallest cracks. Eau Claire was no longer the peaceful town it once was, but it was stronger, more awake, and forever changed. Because from now on, everyone understood, the truth can be buried, but it cannot be forgotten. The story of Lori Ann Halverson and Richard Lowell is not just a criminal case solved after half a century, but also deeply reflects social issues that still persist in the United States today: trust, transparency, and individual responsibility to the community. Lowell, a once respected officer, hid his mistake for 50 years just because he feared losing his honor, only for that fear itself to destroy his entire life. In a modern American society, where reputation and personal image are exposed on social media every minute, the story reminds us that honesty and the courage to face mistakes are still values more important than any glamorous facade. Lowell's choice to remain silent caused a family to live in agony for half a century. This shows that the delay of the truth can cause deeper damage than the original sin. In contrast, Maya Collins, the young investigator, symbolizes the unyielding spirit before time and deadlock. She represents the new American generation, believing in science, technology, and professional ethics to pursue justice. And Karen Halverson, the victim's niece, shows the power of forgiveness, a very American quality, where people can find peace again, not through revenge, but through understanding. Amid a turbulent society, the story reminds us that justice does not lie only in the hands of the courts, but begins with each individual, in the way we face our faults, in the way we dare to speak the truth, even if late, and in the belief that the truth, even if buried, will always find its way back to the light. Thank you for following to the end of the journey to seek justice for Lori Ann Halverson, a story that shows that the truth, even buried for half a century, will one day be revealed. Please subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more cold cases where justice and humanity are still searching for each other in the darkness of time.